Oh, it's here. It's here, alright. Everybody calm down. Actually, don't. Attack on Titan Season 4 Part 3, the first half, Part 1, whatever you wanna call it, is here. And boy oh boy does this look phenomenal. Of course, it doesn't look perfect top to bottom, there are some issues here and there, but considering the absolute insanity that needed to be animated, and the lack of time to do the same, this episode was a historical feat of animation, it really truly was. A couple of days or so back, director Yuichiro Hayashi said that the limiter had been removed from the final part. They are going all out and I'm all for it. I won't ramble on for too long, let's break down the episode visually. Since it's a long episode, I won't give you blanket statements about the art direction and the compositing. Instead, I'll go through this scene by scene. The very first thing we see is the see you later scene, and now I can talk about this. So basically, this scene was supposed to be in the very first episode of season 1, and without spoiling anything, this is a very important line of dialogue that comes into play later. For some reason, Wit Studios team decided to skip this. Why did they do that? Anyway, this whole scene had a very dreamlike aesthetic to it, with strong chromatic aberrations on the shadows. This scene had this ethereal dreamlike feel, which was absolutely perfect. Of course, that is thanks to the compositing. I love the shadows throughout this entire sequence. The chromatic aberration on the shadows continues for the Ramsey and Halil scene. I absolutely love this sequence. It feels ominous. Since the birds are pretty much silhouettes, it's very hard to tell if they are CGI. The camera work here is so competent. Hayashi's storyboards really brings this scene to life. The camera movement around Ramsey and Halil is really nice, with the backgrounds moving so fast, it almost looks like action lines, and the shadows on their faces move accordingly. Also notice how the rumbling isn't initially accompanied by the red sky or the hellscape-like visuals. Initially, the whole thing looks like My Hero Academia rumbling, but the color grading changes as the colossal titans come closer. Things start burning and dust starts filling the air. I love that. This is how you use creative color grading and dynamic lighting. If the change in color palette is going to be long term and not just for one or two heavily stylized scenes, give it a reason. Why would everything turn orangish? Well, because everything is on f***ing fire. That makes sense, doesn't it? There's a reason for this incredible yet unique color palette. And speaking of color palettes, the late evening look as Eren walks through the crowd is amazing. Also, most of the crowd is hand-drawn, which is always insane. You can see a really good looking low angle shot here, and in traditional filmmaking, a low angle shot symbolizes power and strength, as these shots make the character or characters look big. What was Eren thinking about in this scene? He was thinking about the fact that he had the power to kill everybody around him. Storyboarding isn't just about creating good looking shots, it's about creating good looking shots for a reason. The 3D background in this shot also looks top notch, although the perspective on Eren's legs is ever so slightly off model compared to the rest of his body. I love the way Eren's face twists into this expression. Also, the slow and subtle camera shakes really makes this expression feel more natural. Attack on Titan always had incredible eye shots, I won't mention it every time, so here you go. Also, I should mention something else. While as a whole I do like the digital line work on the faces, there are shots where it comes off as excessive and a bit distracting. Although these are few and far in between. They went unnecessarily hard animating these 3 grown men beating up a child. Like seriously, it's one of the better hand-to-hand combat scenes this year, combat in quotation marks. Eren's facial expressions are really good throughout the entire I am sorry scene, and the drawings are really strong as well, as they should be for a scene of this magnitude. And so, the rumbling is unleashed upon them. The 3D background really adds a dynamic element to the entire sequence. It makes the running feel more urgent and chaotic. The money in this cut is actually 3D, by the way. The effects look really good here. They are animated by Taichi Furumata. I really love this cut. There's just something so oddly satisfying about the way the houses break apart one after the other. The hypothetical camera moves really well here. A lot of the debris in the scene is actually CGI, which was very well hidden. Love this shot right here. It feels like somebody attached a camera to one of the falling rocks. And ladies and gentlemen, this is character acting. The facial expressions and the physical pain that was conveyed through them. It was sickening in a good way. If your leg got crushed, this is exactly how you would react. This was an incredible sequence of cuts, also the slow motion. Of course, there's only so much they can show here. The contrast between the blue from the past and the red from the present is really creative. Also, about the rumbling itself, holy smokes, it looks unreal. The storyboards around the rumbling scenes added so much. In fact, besides the Ramsey scenes, the manga only had around 5 panels of the rumbling. The guy offing himself, the car chase bit, Dr. Jaeger, all of these scenes are anime only additions and get across the horrors of the rumbling itself so well. Yuichiro Hayashi, who storyboarded most of this episode, excels at horror. Look at Dorohedoro or even Kakegurui. He makes the scenes feel unnerving when necessary. He really elaborated on this part of the chapter. A vast majority of the crowds in these scenes were actually hand-drawn, which is ridiculous. The rumbling was largely done using CGI. Again, what else do you expect? The CGI colossals looked really good, and the effects and the steam were very cleverly used to hide some of the potentially awkward portions of the 3D work. Those rotation shots were absolutely insane, especially the extended one. Now I'm sure a lot of you think that the actual colossals are the only difficult to animate aspect of the rumbling, but that's not true. Think about the effects animation that's required. Every time a colossal titan takes a step, a complex cloud of dirt, smoke and debris needs to be added. And the effects were largely hand-drawn. It must have been hell. Also love the dichotomy here. A torn hand of a poor rumbling victim flies off as Eren moves his hand in a similar position. Very clever. The close-ups of the victim were really good looking as well. And that brings us to the iconic Freedom panel. You see amazing fabric animation, a top-tier rotation shot corrected by character designer Tomohiro Kishi himself, a close-up of the eye, and then the money shot. Now yes, this particular shot, just this frame, looks somewhat inferior compared to the manga panel, but this one frame isn't all there is to the anime's version of this scene. As I mentioned, the rotation, the fabric, all of that adds a lot. Also, I feel like we've made this Freedom panel a bit too iconic. Anyway, yeah, this looked fine, shut up. There's not much to talk about for the next 10 minutes or so. The water looked good, Falco's breakdown looked really good, the animation on the centipede was incredible too, really smooth. Also, they pulled out like 5 different color palettes. A lot of this episode was structured like a movie, with these silent dialogue scenes and cinematic storyboards. I love these shots, it feels like the camera is fixed on one corner of the roof. In fact, there were some really good perspectives in camera work throughout the more static scenes. Flock shows up next and his expression captures how tired he is really well. Man's been shot after all. I never liked this panel in the manga. It made it seem like Flock could fire his gun normally but missed every shot because he had stormtrooper aim. But the anime handles this well. He looks like he has no idea where he is and he's simply firing haphazardly. A cool cut of Mikasa comes next, although riddled with motion blur. Flock literally hanging by his neck was a brutal anime-only addition. Also, look at this shot. Just look at this. One of the best eye shots in the entire series. Also, talk about going from the sublime to the ridiculous. The colossal titans falling was so funny yet terrifying. Funny for us and terrifying for this poor soul who had to animate the effects for it. And that brings us to the Hanji scene. And let's only talk about the visuals here. The first ODM cut was also the weakest one. The background movement was very competent, but the character animation was relatively straightforward. That's fine because it was just a setup for the actual action. And after flawlessly adapting this panel, they went right into the action. The first bit is animated by Taichi Furumata and this person whose name I won't even attempt to pronounce. The colossal titan here is pretty much treated as the background for the first cut. Hanji shows some solid movement followed by some incredible effects. The amount of debris here is nuts. Also, remember what I said about the effects hiding the awkward elements of the CGI? Well, this is what the rough draft of this cut looked like. We then reach Kyukawa's cut, and it's absolutely phenomenal. For the record, he also animated the Flock scene from part 2. The background here was entirely 3D, including the colossal titans. His work in part 2 featured 2D backgrounds, so this is a bit different. Zooming in so much on the 3D colossal leads to some of the details on them looking off, but it's nearly impossible to notice in motion. Aside from that, it's classic ODM gear animation, with the character moving a lot. Hanji can be tiny in one scene and occupy most of the screen in the next one. This makes it feel dynamic. The smear work on the ODM cables are not as impressive as Kyukawa's work on part 2, but that's not really an issue. There's some great foreshortening, which makes the whole thing feel even more dynamic. There's even a reference to Arifumi Imai's cut in season 3. At least I think it's a reference. Also love the slow motion early on, such a great shot. The whole scene has a ton of energy and said energy transitions flawlessly between the flying and the running scenes. More incredible effects follow. Also look at that extra dramatic colossal titan here. The next major ODM sequence is next, animated by Taichi Furumata. Hanji emerges out of the smoke, which is a really cool visual. Taichi Furumata mainly handles the effects for Attack on Titan, so it's no surprise that the effects and debris throughout this sequence look top notch. There's more of that dynamic movement relative to the camera. Hanji occupies most of the screen in one frame and barely any of the screen in the next. There's some really impressive mid-air rock dodging from Hanji, although the cut itself is a tad bit too fast if that makes any sense. I wish they held on to Hanji flying through the city for a few extra seconds. Also, the cut to Hanji turning is a bit awkward. The final bit looks really good. The scene goes from a regular shot to an extreme close-up to a regular shot again and then back to an extreme close-up. and because of this, a lot of energy is packed into that final slice. The facial expressions also helps with that. Although the timing on that second to last cut could be a tad bit better, but that's just a minor nitpick. They snuck in a quick partial rotation shot around a CGI ship. Our adventures with the ODM gear isn't over yet. Another energetic cut follows. They hold on to Hanji's pose before the slice for 6 or so frames before finally releasing it. Some really nice fabric animation follows. We then get to Hanji's final ODM scene, animated by another individual whose name I won't attempt to pronounce. There's a 14-second uninterrupted cut of Hanji flying around and doing scout things, while she's literally on fire. So not only did the animator have to draw the scene, he or she also had to animate a fire and have it interact accordingly with Hanji's movement. Hanji is turned into an UFO for a few frames. The TV version of this cut appears to have some minor ghosting. This entire sequence basically uses the Colossals as 3D backgrounds, allowing for some really dynamic shots. The little role Hanji did would be funny if she wasn't on fire while doing it. And that brings us to the end. Some incredible effects animation can be seen. In fact, the final ODM cut is a first-person shot from Hanji's POV through melting glasses. Also, lovely character acting on Armin. There's not much to talk about for a while again, besides some creative storyboarding, so I'll take this opportunity and talk about the art direction and general compositing. The backgrounds look really good, and they fit whichever color palette the scene is going for, and there are like 50 of those this episode. The compositing is a lot cleaner, although there is a fair bit of motion blur abuse. I love how Fort Salta looks. Again, the color palette is normal because the rumbling hasn't reached this point yet. The sky, however, has a hint of apocalyptic green, which is really good. I love how the scale of this fort is handled, with some ambitious rotation shots here and there. We get a good look at the CGI model for Eren's founding titan here, and it looks really creepy in a good way, of course. The oil barrels are most likely CGI, and we get this really dynamic shot of the barrel falling on the Colossal. The amount of explosions that follow is ridiculous. This is why this portion of AOT is cartoonishly difficult to animate. The sheer scale of it all. Everything explode, hundreds of oil barrels all blow up. Every one of those explosions need to be animated. Satoshi Sakai and this individual animated all of the effects around this part. Also, I love Zeke's new look, and the lighting around it makes it even more eye-catching. It's still essentially the same model but colored differently. More gorgeous explosions follow. The 3D boat plane thing does some really nice moving around, and then we see one of the most seamless 3D 2D transitions, with the arm serving as the actual transition. We then get the final action scene of this episode as the gang jumps down. Everybody gets a small piece of ODM Sakuga. The hair, fabric and perspective and smears on Zeke's hand being some of the highlights early on. The entire background work is insane. One of the characters in this show is so large that it serves as the background for the other characters. Levi flies through the rocks, which is always a joy to watch. Reiner gets the most love out of the team here. Not only does he have the best ODM cut, he also has a really well done transformation. Love the way he literally propels. It's very physically accurate and satisfying to watch. More gorgeous effects follow. This particular panel was really done justice, although the yellow was slightly overbearing. Not as bad as part 1 though, definitely not. Love them tumbling around. Any scene that takes place on Eren's back automatically feels dynamic, perhaps because of those spike things. Even the Card Titan gets her moment with this amazing rotation shot, made possible thanks to the CGI. Just look at the plane flying between the spikes, it looks so good. Probably wasn't too difficult to animate because it was entirely basic CGI, not the models, the animation. This final money shot ends the episode, drawn by Takayuki Sano. I'm pretty sure this is a single frame with some effect on it. And just like that, the first core of part 3 came to an end. From start to finish, this was one of the most visually impressive things that I've seen in a long time. Even more so when you consider the production situation behind the scenes. Yeah, the characters were off model at times, and a few of the drawings were not the strongest, but as a whole, this part looked so good that it won't be necessary to bring up the Mappa didn't have enough time argument. They also skipped some of the most iconic panels from the manga, although of course those panels aren't removed from the show. They are most likely shifted to the next part. Without spoiling anything, the skipped panels are essentially more rumbling shots, so they'll serve as a perfect cold open to the upcoming part, which will air this fall season. I loved it. I loved everything about this episode, I really did. And that's all. Wanna see an animation breakdown for Chainsaw Man? Click on the video on screen. Do hit a like and subscribe, that helps out a lot, so do that, and see ya.